Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum and I'm here today at Morphy's with a US Civil War carbine that is referred to by a number of different names. You'll sometimes see this called a Cosmopolitan carbine, sometimes a Union carbine or a Union rifle, and sometimes a Gwyn and Campbell carbine. And there's good reason for all of these different names, which we will get into in the course of this video. First off, what is the gun? It is fundamentally a breech-loading carbine. It uses a paper cartridge with a separate external percussion cap. So this is one of those intermediary designs that this is typical of the US Civil War and cavalry carbines, where it's more advanced than just an old school muzzle loader where you have to pour powder down the barrel, ram a bullet down the barrel, and then cap it and then fire it. But it's not as advanced as a metallic cartridge firing gun where you have a complete self-contained cartridge in a nice sturdy metal case that you just drop into the gun and fire. This is right in between, and we'll touch on exactly how it works in a couple minutes. It is a carbine. It is 52 caliber. It is short and handy, and in the US Civil War, the infantry basically always just had old school muzzle-loaded rifled muskets. The War Department during the Civil War, General Ripley, who was in charge of it, he was really of the opinion that they wanted to stick to a known, functional, reliable gun. It's not the highest technology available, but we can make them in large numbers. They're available. We don't want to mess with what works for the infantry. But for the cavalry, he was much more willing to experiment with novel technologies. And so there's a wide variety of different carbine designs that get used and adopted by the Union during the Civil War. Now, for the purposes of this guy, there are three characters that we need to be familiar with. The first is Henry Gross. He's a firearms designer, tinkerer, gunsmith. He's the one who actually first designed the gun in 1859. We then have two other characters. We have Edward Gwyn and Abner Campbell. And those are the Gwyn and Campbell, from the gun's name. These two guys are business partners. Gwyn is a Brit, Campbell's an American. They were partners together in the Hamilton Gaslight and Coke Works, coke being a process where you extract fuel material from coal. Old school thing, we don't do coke anymore. But this was a major business at the time. Gwyn and Campbell were in business together. In the early 1850s, Gwyn actually got into a firearms business with Gross that didn't end up working out. But the two knew each other, and when Gross designed this new style of gun that he thought was going to be really successful for what was clearly an upcoming conflict by 1859, he went back to Gwyn, and in turn Campbell, to help him set up a company to actually manufacture the gun. A classic sort of firearms design story where you have two important groups. You have the gun designer and you have the financiers. That's essentially what we have here. So in 1860, they put together a couple of prototype test guns. They actually get them tested by Springfield and also by the Washington Naval Yard. And the testing is actually pretty good. The gun's effective. And these guys are able to convince the governor of Illinois that he ought to have these guns for the Illinois Cavalry, or specifically for the Illinois Governor's Legion. Illinois puts in a request, the War Department agrees to fund it, and they sell 1,140 of these first pattern guns to Illinois. Now, in order to do that, of course, they have a factory. That's where Gwyn and Campbell come in. They partner up and they build a factory in Ohio. It's called the Cosmopolitan Arms Factory, and that's where the Cosmopolitan carbine name comes from. Those first carbines were marked Cosmopolitan, and it takes a little bit of time. It's not until the summer of 1862 that these first carbines are delivered. In fact, the whole order is delivered in June and July of 1862. But where the story takes a bit of a twist is that Edward Gwyn clearly didn't really like having to pay royalties to Henry Gross, the inventor, for his patent. Gwyn is tinkering with the gun, and he realizes that there's a way to really simplify the action of the carbine, and he patents a simplification of the action in the fall of 1862. And then he and Campbell essentially just dump Henry Gross out of the business, because They're no longer making anything that's covered by Henry Gross's patent. Now they're going to start making a gun that's covered by their own patent. And that's when the gun goes from being the Cosmopolitan to being marked Gwyn and Campbell. In addition, the simplification is a good thing. This isn't just a way to screw the original inventor out of his royalties. It really is a simplification. In fact, the next contract that they get with the Union for 2,000 guns, they're able to drop the price from $27 a piece down to $20 a piece. You know, it's like 25% reduction in price. That's really substantial. And it's probably part of the reason that they're able to get a contract for 2,000 guns in 1862. Now, those 2,000 carbines were supposed to be delivered in November and December of 1862. Those come through late. It's not until April of 1863 that they're all finally delivered. But they are actually all delivered, and they work. These guns are getting issued out to cavalry units in the Union. Field reports start coming back. Like, the guns are good. They're not perfect. There are complaints about them, but contrary to some of the small arms enterprises of the Civil War, like, they're delivered almost on time and in good working order, and that's a real accomplishment. Now, those first 2,000 guns are what we will call today a Type 1 Gwyn and Campbell, and we have one of those here as well that in just a minute I'll show you the differences between the two. That first order is successful enough that Gwyn and Campbell go and petition the government for a follow-up order, and remarkably, they don't get a contracted number of guns on order. They get an actual open order. The government literally says, we will buy as many of these carbines as you can deliver to us by December 31st, 1863. So you got the rest of the year, we'll take them all, whatever you can put together. Now, they're only able to put together another 2,200 guns. I don't know, I guess they weren't really super well prepared for that eventuality. They had to spin up a lot of production, but they deliver another 2,200 by the end of 1863. 2 months later, February of 1864, they get another order, this time for 3,000 guns. And at that point, they've made a few further simplifications, and that's when we get to this specific style, which is the Type 2 Gwyn and Campbell. Shockingly, they deliver 3,000 of those guns on time, and they're able to petition the government for yet another order for another 1,000 guns in November of 1864. Now, those appear to have been guns that were already on hand, like they built enough extra parts that they were able to just throw them together from things already manufactured, because they deliver those guns within about a month. And like, this isn't the most common carbine of the US Civil War, not by a long stretch. It's not the best carbine of the Civil War, but it is a reliable and effective workhorse of a carbine. So let's take a look at both the Type 1 and the Type 2, and I'll show you how they work and what they changed. All right, here are our two patterns. This is the first pattern, Gwyn and Campbell. This is the second pattern. I'm gonna go ahead and start with the second pattern. We'll show you how it works, and then we'll look at the differences between the two. This is a very Spartan utilitarian gun. We have a simple front sight post there. We have a rear sight here. That is a ladder. Flip it up. You can shoot out to, theoretically, 600 yards, although nobody is effectively shooting 600 yards with a gun like this. The action has this funky curved lever. You'll actually sometimes see these referred to as Grapevine carbines, and that's just a reference to the shape of that serpentine. That is the operating lever and the trigger guard. So I can unlock it back here by pushing that back, and then I lift the lever, pull the lever down, and that is going to drop the breech block right there. Pulls it back slightly. First it pulls it back and then drops it down. This is where I would then load a cartridge. And when I say a cartridge, I mean a linen or paper cartridge. So it's going to be powder, a ball at the front, and then a powder charge behind it, all wrapped together in paper. So it's a self-contained unit. Specifically, this was designed for a 390 grain bullet and 40 grains of black powder behind it. So I stuff that in there. I then close the breech, lock it in place. I then have an external percussion cap to fire it. There is a half-cock notch there to carry it safely. So you'd load the cartridge, you then place a primer on the nipple there. When you're ready to fire, you bring the hammer back to full cock. When you fire it, of course, it drops down, detonates the percussion cap, which is going to send fire through a little hole into the back of the chamber, through the paper or linen cartridge case, ignite the cartridge, and fire. And that's all there is to the operation. It's really quite simple. We have a sling bar on this side. These are cavalry guns, so it would be typical to have these on a single point cross brace sling that hooks onto that ring. We have a couple markings here. We have Gwyn and Campbell patent. That's 1862. That is Edward Gwyn's improved patent, and they were made in Hamilton, Ohio. At the time, the abbreviation for Ohio was just an O, so that's all that's on there. This is marked Union Rifle on the front of the receiver, which is why you will sometimes see these referred to in modern and old sources as Union rifles. We have our serial number on the bottom. This one's just over 3,000. Now, to show you how the internals work, I can remove this screw, which is the pivot for the breech block and the operating lever. Let's pull that down, get it nice and loose. All right, that screw comes out. And then we can pull out this. So that's all there is to it. That's the breech face. This pushes your paper cartridge into the chamber right here, and it sets it just a little bit below the surface. And the idea is the bevel right there at the base of the breech block, and this bevel in the face of the barrel, those match up, and that mostly seals gas inside the gun. There's no brass cartridge case to expand and give you a proper gas seal. So these do leak some gas, but they don't really leak gas backwards. I would definitely refer you to the capandball.eu video on shooting these guns by my Hungarian friend Balázs Nemet. He has a video where he does a bunch of shooting with one of these and has some high-speed footage showing the gas leakage. And it does leak out, especially the bottom, but doesn't really go back into the shooter's eyes. Now, this round design here is Edward Gwyn's improved patent. Henry Gross's original style, what you'll see on the Cosmopolitan carbines, is a square block in here that slides back and forth instead of being a round cam. This really is more, it's simpler, it's more efficient, both to make and to operate, and it really was an improvement to the system. Unfortunately, I don't have a Cosmopolitan here to show you the internals, but I'll see if we can get a picture of the Cosmopolitan breech block as a comparison. Now let's take a look at the Type 1 and the Type 2 and the differences between them. This wasn't like a hard, absolute change, a very strict change. This was a little bit more of a gradual change as they ran out of one type of part and started using another different type of part. So there are some transitional guns, but in general, right about halfway through overall production, they moved from this style to that style. There are 3 substantial visible changes, major changes between these two patterns. The first one is the rear sight, and this actually happened first. So the last 750 or so of the Type 1 guns will actually have the shorter rear sight. This one's not in great shape and it's missing its elevation slider, but the original sight was graduated out to 900 yards. They changed that up to a 600-yard sight. So it's shorter, it's less material, it's less marking to do, it's easier, and it's more practical because nobody was actually shooting a carbine like this out to 900 yards. The second change was the design of the hammer, and this is just a pure manufacturing simplification. They went from a rounded hammer here that's a little more decorative to a just flat slab-sided hammer here that's going to be quicker and easier to manufacture. That's pretty obvious why they would do something like that, and it's a pretty simple change to make. And the third change was to the latch mechanism that holds the operating lever closed and the design of the lever itself along with it at the same time. So the first pattern, Gwyn and Campbell's, have this sort of trigger-like hook and a lever that comes all the way back inbound at the end. The second pattern has more of a little claw and a shorter hook that snaps in like that. There are a couple other subtle changes that also happen. For example, here the screw is mounted on the right side on the Type 1, where on the Type 2 they put the screw on the left and it comes through into the lock plate. The markings change a bit. So on the second pattern, you've got the Gwyn and Campbell marking back here. On the first pattern, it's really heavily worn on this example, but it was up here. Little changes like that. Overall, it's almost exactly a 50-50 split between these two. The first two contracts were Type 1s, and the second two contracts were filled with Type 2s. In total, 9,342 of these carbines were sold to the Union military during the Civil War. And that includes both the original Cosmopolitans and the Gwyn and Campbell, both variants of Gwyn and Campbell carbines. In addition to that, the company sold 6.3 million rounds of ammunition to the government and they were the sole provider of the ammunition. It was a proprietary cartridge for these carbines. Not a metallic cartridge, it was a linen cartridge, but the government had to buy the ammo somewhere. Gwyn and Campbell sold it alongside the guns, and I suspect, I don't have the numbers, but I bet they made more money on the ammunition sales than they did on the gun sales. At any rate, Gwyn and Campbell came out doing reasonably well from this whole project. Henry Gross didn't so much, the original inventor. He was involved in some lawsuits, some patent infringement stuff, trying to make some claims to recoup royalties he figured he was owed. He clearly, obviously, for good reason, wasn't happy about being essentially muscled out of his own invention, but all of those claims ultimately went nowhere. Now, after the war, this is clearly obsolete technology. The metallic cartridge is the thing that's coming. Gwyn and Campbell do make at least a pro forma attempt to put this into Union military trials for replacement, new adoption of guns after the war. It goes nowhere, not surprisingly. Campbell dies in 1868. When that happens, Gwyn moves out of Ohio, or moves from where they had been working in Ohio, and the whole company shuts down. There's clearly just no good reason to keep doing this after the Civil War is over. And that's pretty much the end of the story. Between the end of the war and about 1901, the government would sell 6,803 of the Cosmopolitan and Gwyn and Campbell carbines as military surplus. So about 2/3 of them, a little more than 2/3 of them, survived the war intact, which is not a bad survival rate. They were sold by sold to a variety of clients and surplus dealers for a variety of prices, typically less than $1 a piece of surplus. The cheapest quantity I saw listed in government surplus sale came out to like 12.5 cents per gun. And again, that's not unheard of, not totally uncommon for Civil War arms surplus after the end of the war. There was just mountains of leftover war material, and it all became obsolete very quickly because there was so much change in technology as we moved towards self-contained metallic cartridges in the late 1860s and 1870s. So a bunch of stuff got bought up by the French during the Franco-Prussian War, but then a ton of the rest of it went out to dealers like Schuyler, Hartley and Graham, Bannerman, and others. Now, if you would like to see more information specifically on the loading and the shooting, the hands-on practice with the Gwyn and Campbell, I would highly recommend you check out the capandball.eu video on the subject by our Hungarian friend Balázs Nemet. I will link to that video in the description text below. He's a fantastic presenter and a fantastic scholar of black powder firearms. So check that out. Big thanks to Morphees for giving me access to these two patterns of Gwyn and Campbell to show to you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.